Ever run into a word in another language and think, wait, that sounds familiar somehow?
Yeah, like way too close to be a coincidence.
Exactly. Today, we're diving into a whole sea of those aha moments, exploring some pretty surprising connections between Latin and Slavic languages.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Those feel like very different branches on the language family tree.
Right. And we're not just talking about, like, the Roman Empire's influence spreading Latin around. This goes way further back before written history, even.
Oh, wow, prehistory. So how are we tracing that?
Our guide is this fascinating blog post from COGNIARCHAE, a website all about, get this, cognitive archaeology.
Cognitive archaeology. That sounds like a contradiction, like digging up thoughts.
It does, doesn't it? But basically, it's using linguistics, like word comparisons, alongside the usual archaeology and even genetics to understand how past cultures thought, their whole worldview.
Huh. So instead of digging for pottery shards, we're digging for, like, shared words as clues.
You got it. And the article we're looking at points out a ton of these between Latin and Slavic languages, which on the surface seem worlds apart.
Give me an example. What kind of words?
Okay, so mouse in Latin is mus, right?
Yeah, I've heard that. Biology terms and such.
Well, in many Slavic languages, it's mish, or your home is domus in Latin, but really similar dome in Slavic languages.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. But couldn't a few words just be coincidence or maybe borrowed later on?
That's what I thought, too. But the article lists tons of them, not just obscure stuff, but basic vocabulary, like opening dictionaries to random pages and seeing almost the same words.
What are the odds? So it's the sheer quantity that's striking.
It's more than that. It's the types of words. These are for everyday things like animals, family, body parts, basic actions, the building blocks of language, not fancy borrowed terms.
That does point to something deeper than just, like, languages bumping into each other. So is this saying Latin's, like, the long-lost parent of Slavic languages, then?
Not quite a parent. Think more like a distant cousin. They both share a common ancestor way back, something linguists call Proto-Indo-European.
That big old mystery language. No written records, right. So how do they even know it existed?
Exactly. By looking at its descendants, languages spread across Europe and even parts of Asia. Like finding enough similar traits that you can kind of reverse engineer the original source.
So these shared words between Latin and Slavic, they're like whispers from that lost language.
Exactly. And by tracing them back, we get a glimpse into how people thousands of years ago might have communicated what mattered to them.
Almost like finding similar pottery styles in two places you didn't think were connected. Different on the surface, but the technique hints at a shared origin. We're doing that, but with language.
And it makes you wonder what else we can learn from these echoes. Like the article dives into specific examples that are just too good to skip. For instance, Latin polis, meaning city.
Yeah, like metropolis, politics.
Yeah. It has this weird link to the Slavic word polje, which means field. Who knew city life and open fields could be so linguistically intertwined?
Hold on, polis, polie. There is a similarity there. How's that even possible?
That's the cool part. The author suggests both might come from an even older meaning, like open space or maybe pasture, something like that.
Makes sense when you think about it. Early settlements, the line between a village and the fields around it might have been blurry.
Exactly. And get this, the Roman goddess Pales, protector of pastures and flocks. Her name echoes in both polis and polje.
Whoa, that's wild. So it's not just the words themselves, but the whole cultural context they hint at.
And that's just one example. There's another one about light. In Latin, it's lux, right?
It's lux, like luminescent.
And in many Slavic languages, it's luch. But here's the cool part. Luch can also mean resinous wood, the kind you use to start fires.
No way. So the word for light is directly connected to how they made light. That's incredible.
It really drives home how important fire was back then. Like, imagine the word for light itself comes from how you actually got light.
Right. It wasn't some abstract thing. It was directly tied to survival, to their everyday experience.
Exactly. These small differences can reveal a lot about a culture's priorities, beliefs, their whole way of seeing the world.
Well, get this. Even something as simple as personal hygiene had its own linguistic connection. In Latin, they had the stridulus, which was this tool for scraping dirt and oil off the body.
Like a squeegee, but for people.
Exactly. And you know what? That connects directly to the Slavic verb strugati, which means to scrape.
No way. So even something as everyday as, well, scraping yourself clean
Hmm.
connects these languages. The more we dig into this, the more intertwined these cultures seem to be.
Right. It makes you wonder just how much we've missed by looking at these languages as separate entities. Now, before we get too sidetracked, what about something a little closer to home? What about the hearth, the heart of a home?
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
Think about it. The Latin word for hearth is caminus, and that word could actually be related to the Slavic word for stone, kamen.
Stone hearth makes sense when you think about how they were built back then.
Exactly. Ancient hearths were often made out of stone. It's like a shared understanding, not just of a physical structure, but of the hearth's symbolic importance to home and family life across cultures.
It's like we're seeing this whole web of connections between Latin and Slavic, from the tools they used to the structures they built.
It really makes you realize that every word has a story to tell, a history that goes way beyond its dictionary definition. So we've got all these words, these little linguistic breadcrumbs leading us back in time, but what do they all add up to? What's the big takeaway here about Latin and Slavic languages?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is we don't have a time machine. We can't go back and see exactly how these groups were interacting. But these shared words, these echoes of this common linguistic ancestor, they tell us something really crucial.
They tell us these groups weren't total strangers, right?
Exactly. At least some level of contact had to be happening, whether it was through trade, cultural exchange, or even, more complicated relationships. They weren't completely isolated from each other.
So maybe we don't know all the specifics, but we know there's a story there, a shared history waiting to be uncovered.
And that's what I love about linguistics, right? It gives us these tools to piece together the puzzle of the past. It helps us see connections that maybe traditional historical sources don't always capture.
It really makes you think, right? Like, what other clues are hidden within the languages we speak every day? What can they tell us about the journeys our ancestors took, the connections they forged?
It's a thought-provoking question. It reminds us that language is more than just words. It's a living testament to human connection, to the ways we've interacted and influenced each other throughout history.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, a huge thank you to everyone for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the surprising ties between Latin and Slavic languages.
And remember, keep those ears open. You never know what linguistic mysteries you might uncover just by listening closely.
Until next time, happy exploring.